Number 1.
Bianca Lebron was a happy and outgoing 10-year-old girl when she went missing on November 7, 2001. It started out like a normal Wednesday at her home in Bridgeport, Connecticut. Bianca, a 5th grade student at Elias Howe School, was in an excited mood when she arrived at school. As she stood outside the school with her teacher and classmates, she announced that her uncle was going to take her to the mall to go shopping that day. The class was in line waiting to go inside the building at 8:30 a.m. when they saw a brown van pull over next to the school. When the driver got out, Bianca clearly recognized him. Hopping up and down, Bianca excitedly told the group that the man driving the van was her uncle. She urged a couple of her friends to come along on the shopping trip, but they refused. Everyone watched as Bianca left the schoolyard and ran over to the van, then jumped inside. Bianca gave her classmates a final wave as the van pulled away. It was the last time the little girl would ever be seen. Although Bianca's teacher had seen her when she arrived that morning, he didn't say anything when Bianca said she was leaving. Instead, he simply marked her down as being absent. The school did not call Bianca's home, so her mother and stepfather weren't aware of the fact that Bianca was not in class. Her mother, Carmelita Torres, was only slightly concerned when Bianca didn't return home by 4:30 p.m. She was a personable girl and had a tendency to lose track of time while chatting with her friends. She knew she was supposed to call home if she stopped by a friend's house, but would sometimes forget to do so. By 8:30 p.m., her family was starting to panic. They began calling her friends to see if any of them had been with Bianca after school. When they were told that Bianca hadn't attended class that day, they were stunned. They called the Bridgeport Police Department and reported her missing. After learning from students that Bianca had been seen getting into a van with a man she referred to as her uncle, detectives initially assumed the entire thing was just a big misunderstanding. Carmelita informed the detectives that Bianca had no uncles and no one in the family was aware of anyone who had a brown van. Bianca may have known the person who picked her up, but he certainly wasn't part of their family. According to witnesses, an Hispanic man in his 20s was driving the van. He had a black afro and long sideburns, a prominent nose, and scratches on both of his cheeks. He was wearing a blue pullover, jeans, and scuffed brown Timberland boots. No one in Bianca's family matched that description, and they struggled to understand how Bianca's teacher could have allowed her to leave with the man. Bianca was one of 4 children and was known for being friendly to everyone she met. She was confident and outspoken and was an excellent student who enjoyed school. According to Carmelita, the 10-year-old was just starting to show an interest in boys, but was too young to have had any serious relationships. Some of Bianca's friends, however, told detectives that Bianca had a secret relationship with an older male. They had seen Bianca with the man numerous times, and one friend claimed she saw them holding hands and kissing. They believed this was the same man who had picked her up from school. None of Bianca's friends were able to name the man. After speaking with numerous witnesses and family members, detectives were convinced Bianca had indeed been abducted, but they had few leads to follow. They released a composite sketch of the subject and described his van as being brown and beige with several areas where the paint had been sanded off, chrome trim on the side, and tinted windows. Despite Bianca's young age, the abduction received very little media coverage. She went missing on Wednesday and the story didn't make the news until Saturday. Bianca's family did what they could to raise awareness about the case. Her stepfather spent hours traveling around Bridgeport to hang up missing posters. Bianca's biological father also joined in the search, appearing at several press conferences with Carmelita to plead for the return of their daughter. In December, police got a tip that a child matching Bianca's description had been seen in Pittsburgh. Carmelita's hopes soared, but officials in Pennsylvania looked into the sighting and were unable to confirm it was Bianca. Although tips would continue to trickle in, the case slowly went cold. 2 years after Bianca went missing, police got a tip that led to them questioning 20-year-old Jason Lara. Jason had lived in Bridgeport until a month after Bianca disappeared, when he suddenly moved to Fort Myers, Florida. Bianca had known Jason because his mother was dating Bianca's great-uncle, and Jason matched the description of the man who had taken Bianca. He also had access to a brown van during the time he lived in Bridgeport. He vehemently denied any involvement in the case, but some of Bianca's friends were adamant that Jason was the man who Bianca had been seen kissing. His girlfriend, who had been dating him for 3 years, said that the rumors of Jason being in any kind of relationship with Bianca were ludicrous. Jason, who had been using the name Jason Gonzalez when he lived in Bridgeport, was wanted on a forgery charge, so he was arrested and brought back to Connecticut. While he was in custody, he was interviewed extensively by detectives about Bianca's disappearance. He continued to deny any involvement with her, and detectives were unable to find any hard evidence connecting him to the case. In 2009, police received a tip from a confidential informant that Bianca had been killed and buried in Seaside Park and Bridgeport. Investigators dug up a 1,000-square-foot section of the park looking for any evidence to back up this claim, but found nothing related to the case. The school district in Bridgeport was highly criticized for allowing Bianca to leave school property. In the immediate aftermath of the disappearance, Bianca's teacher was suspended for not confirming that she had permission to leave school that morning. The school also made several changes to improve security, including having a police officer monitor the outside of the school during arrival and dismissal times. None of these would help ease Carmelita's rage towards the school, however, and she had Bianca declared dead 7 years after she went missing. She then filed a lawsuit against the city, alleging that it was their negligence that led to Bianca's death. The case never went to trial. Instead, a settlement was reached requiring the city to pay $750,000 to the family. According to investigators, Bianca's case remains active, but they have not had any new leads in several years. Bianca Lebron was 10 years old when she went missing in 2001. She has brown hair, hazel eyes, and a birthmark on her forehead. At the time of her disappearance, she was 4 feet 11 inches tall and weighed 115 pounds. She was last seen wearing beige pants, a camouflage shirt, a blue denim jacket, and black boots. If you have any information on Bianca, please call the Bridgeport Police at 200-576-7671.
Number 2.
No one really knew Garnell Moore, and no one knows what happened to him. He was a 6-year-old boy who never attended school, had no medical or dental history, and had no mother or father. There is only one photo ever taken of him, age 4. He was missing for 3 years before anyone had taken notice. This is the mystery of the invisible boy, the disappearance of Garnell Moore. Garnell was born in Baltimore, Maryland on May 18, 1995, to a career criminal mother who spent most, if not all of her adult life behind bars on drug-related offenses. His father was a petty criminal who was transient and mostly homeless. Garnell spent the earliest of his years with his paternal relatives on the west side of Baltimore, a very poor and rough neighborhood. Garnell found himself living at his Aunt Belinda's rental house at age 6. Belinda Cash never legally adopted Garnell or even attempted to make any effort to officially become the caretaker of young Garnell. Belinda never registered Garnell in any schooling, and there are no medical or dental records available, suggesting that the young boy lived a life without any benefits of society. One day, Garnell Moore, age 7, invisible to the world, vanished. And no one took notice. The last confirmed sighting of Garnell is by his great-aunt, Trina Morton, who saw him playing outside of Belinda Cash's house in August of 2002. Trina Morton, who was the caretaker of Garnell's siblings, called upon Belinda to have him over for a weekend visit. Belinda said it was not a good time, that she was going into labor, and the visit never happened. Trina called to reschedule the visit but was again told by Belinda it was not a good time because this following weekend she was moving to a different rental house. 3 years had passed and no one had heard from or seen Garnell Moore, who would have been 10 years old and in grade 5. Belinda Cash's address and phone number she forwarded to family members was fictitious, and the family lost contact. Garnell's relatives did not realize he had disappeared until June 2005, when a chance meeting with Belinda occurred, and she was questioned about Garnell. Belinda told them that he was away on a school field trip in Virginia. However, school was not in session in June. Trina Morton, worried about the welfare of Garnell, called schools throughout the area to check whether Garnell was enrolled. Employees told them privacy laws prevented the disclosure of any information. Employees at the Juvenile Services Center also said they were at a loss, since Morton had no legal guardianship of Garnell. Troubled that Garnell was living with foster parents or strangers, Trina Morton then called the City Department of Social Services for guidance, but they told her there was nothing they could do, since he had not been deemed a child in need of assistance. Garnell's family, now highly apprehensive and not getting any assistance, contacted police. Police did a records check and found out Garnell was never enrolled in school, anywhere. This led them to question Belinda Cash, and she admitted that she had no means of taking care of Garnell 3 years ago, and so she left him on the steps of a social services building in the 500 block of North Hilton Street near Edmondson Avenue in West Baltimore. Police were suspicious of Aunt Belinda and asked to search her current residence. Police scoured the house to find no sign of Garnell and absolutely no sign that he had ever lived there. A background check by police showed that Belinda had minor criminal activity on her police report and no known child abuse charges. Police tracked down Garnell's father, who had no fixed address, but indicated he thought his son was with Belinda. He told police the last time he saw Garnell was with Belinda at Easter either in 2002 or 2003. His girlfriend at the time confirmed this statement to police, saying she too saw Garnell with Belinda during Easter. Both could not accurately say if it was 2002 or 2003. The neighborhood of where Belinda lived with Garnell before she had moved was canvassed by police, and several witnesses claimed to have seen the little boy playing outside on the street and in yards in 2001, with Belinda Cash identifying as the boy's mother. The police department's missing persons unit got heavily involved with the disappearance and believed that no harm had come to Garnell, but they felt that something was wrong. Detectives searched the old address on a chance that Garnell was somehow left behind. The abandoned house was in bad shape, with plaster dust leaking from the ceiling and moving boxes stacked up in every room. Police investigated and came up empty. They returned again, this time when the homeowner had finally cleared out the house. They searched every room and brought in cadaver dogs in the event that something dreadful had happened to young Garnell. The police and the cadaver dogs found no evidence. Police kept questioning Cash and find her very hard to pinpoint. They do not know if she is telling the truth or lying. Cash agreed to take a lie detector test for detectives. The test, which senses deception by analyzing voice stress, showed that she was being truthful in answering all but one question. The answer she gave, however, according to police, wasn't something that would pin her to a criminal act. Questioned repeatedly by police, she maintained that she left Garnell on the steps of a social services building. However, she told relatives several different stories about how she had to leave Garnell. Again, police could not determine if she had simply made a mistake in the address or if she lied altogether about abandoning Garnell on the steps of a building. Garnell's family worries that perhaps harm had come to young Garnell, either via Belinda Cash or by a complete stranger. They cannot believe that the little boy would simply vanish without a trace. Police indicated no social services agency in Maryland had any record of Garnell. The Hilton Heights Social Services building's employees do not recall ever seeing Garnell Moore on their steps, nor do they have such a child within their records. A house-to-house check of the neighborhood surrounding the address also turned up no leads. No one saw Belinda Cash or Garnell Moore at the social services building. And with that, police determined it was as far as they could take the investigation and handed it over to social services and juvenile court, and to this day, is filed as a mystery. If Cash's story is true, it's possible that a stranger saw the boy on Hilton Avenue and invited him home, perhaps even taking him in as an unofficially adopted child. There is a deep distrust among the Baltimore public of any police or social service, and residents will often do anything to circumvent the system. Jerry Nance, forensic supervisor for the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, believes this mystery can be solved, happily even. Age progression photos were done several years ago to show a teenage Garnell and more recently an adult Garnell. These photos will be available to view at our Facebook page. To find us, simply search Unsolved Mysteries of the World. If you have any information about the disappearance of Garnell Moore, please contact the Baltimore Police Department at 443-984-7385 or the Center for Missing and Exploited Children at 1-800-THE-LOST, that's 1-800-843-5678. If you are the person who lovingly took Garnell into your home and adopted him as your son, know that you did no harm, and please allow him the chance to know his brothers and sisters and be able to once again see his great aunt Trina, or as Garnell called her, Auntie Frina.
Number 3.
The twists and turns of this story read as if they were plucked out of best-selling fiction, but the disappearance of 39-year-old Gracie Nash from Austin, Texas, and all of the components leading up to it are unbelievably etched in truth. This case doesn't begin with Gracie, but with her family and the chaos that ensued from 1983 and 1984. In May 1983, Gracie's brother Melvin Davis, known affectionately as Butch, decided it was time to break up with his girlfriend, Naomi Easley. That was the catalyst that would spark a 10-month attack on the family by Easley, and the story ended in shootings, missing people, and death. Following their breakup, Melvin soon incurred the wrath of his ex. Easley reportedly did her best to get Melvin fired from his job, threatened him with a gun to which he personally disarmed her, and things escalated to the point that police needed to be called during an altercation. When authorities arrived, it's reported that they found her with a butcher knife and a firearm. Melvin wasn't the only person that Easley targeted. He lived with his brother, John Henry Davis Jr., for 15 years, and John found himself on the receiving end of Easley's reported madness. There were instances when John would find the tires of his car slashed and someone repeatedly broke into the Davis brothers' home, where the perpetrator destroyed their clothes and property. 3 months after the breakup, an unnamed suspect set their garage on fire, in turn burning John's car, and Melvin even caught his ex Easley pouring sugar and syrup into his gas tank. Things became progressively worse when relative Ronnie went to visit his brother's home while they weren't there and encountered a distressing scene. It was the day before Halloween, and Ronnie realized upon entering the house that there was someone inside, and when he attempted to flee, he was met with gunshots. Thankfully, he wasn't hit, but the assaults on the family were far from over. November 1983 was 6 months after Melvin broke things off with Easley, but she was still angry. As he was leaving his home, Melvin was reportedly confronted by Easley as he was making his way to his vehicle. She unleashed a physical attack. Easley shot him in the wrist, resulting in Melvin breaking his arm. Unlike previous altercations, this time Easley was arrested. It reportedly didn't take her long to bond herself out of jail, and 3 days after Melvin's attack, someone shot at his brother John as he was leaving their home in the early morning hours. Once again, thankfully he wasn't injured. Now, throughout this ordeal, Gracie Nash, the fourth in 7 siblings, was going about her daily existence. She lived an unassuming life and, according to her loved ones, the mother of 2 steered clear of trouble. She didn't use drugs, she didn't drink, she didn't go out to nightclubs or bars, and her employer said throughout her 10 years employed at a nursing home, she was a respected worker. She'd been married but divorced, and at the time that Gracie went missing, she did have a boyfriend. However, it's reported that her loved ones weren't convinced that a relationship was tied to her disappearance. It was the day after Christmas when Gracie, who lived with her parents and 2 siblings, finished her shift at work at 11 p.m. and assumingly was making her way home. Because it was so cold and the roads were unsafe, Gracie's sisters advised her to leave work early, yet she decided to work her full shift. She never made it back home. The impending investigation into her missing person case uncovered concerning clues as to what may have happened to Gracie Nash. When looking at the parking lot where she worked, authorities found her necklace. 2 days after she disappeared, Gracie's car was found abandoned at an apartment complex. Inside, there was a dismal scene. It looked as if someone had been assaulted, and it's reported that investigators believed evidence pointed to someone having been shot. It's said that there was so much blood it seemed unlikely that the victim could have survived. The family continued to be harassed. It hadn't been 24 hours since Gracie went missing when her mother received a haunting, anonymous phone call. "If you want to see your daughter alive again, tell your son to drop charges against the woman." That was all the person said before they hung up and was never heard from again. Unfortunately, the siblings would suffer another tragedy just 6 weeks later when, in February 1984, John was leaving his home and making his way to his car when someone fired upon him yet again. Unfortunately, he was shot to death. Meanwhile, authorities seemed to believe that all of these incidents were tied to Naomi Easley, but she denied having anything to do with Gracie Nash's disappearance, John's murder, or the break-ins and shootings at her ex's home. She did reportedly admit to threatening him with weapons, slashing his tires, trying to get him fired, and other instances of harassment, but when she was tried in court, she was met with a hung jury. In the end, Easley reportedly received 10 years probation after taking a plea deal of no contest to aggravated assault. While John's murder goes unsolved and Gracie Nash remains a missing person, Easley went on with her life. 3 years after her relationship with Melvin ended, Easley married Kent Moore, but that relationship didn't end in wedded bliss. It's reported that her violent streak continued with her estranged husband while they were in the midst of a divorce. Moore was attacked in 1989 when he sustained 5 gunshot wounds that included 2 that he took in the chest and 1 in the head. He made sure to identify the person he claimed was responsible, his wife Naomi Easley. Tragically, he succumbed to his injuries and died. During the murder trial, Melvin Davis testified against his ex-girlfriend and shared his harrowing experiences and what his family endured. Documents state that Easley attempted to persuade a pastor she was allegedly seeing to testify on her behalf and say that she was with him at the time of her husband's murder. She wrote the pastor letters, blackmailing him and saying that she couldn't make him do anything, but if he didn't, she would tell the world about their relationship. The ball is in your court. You make the next play, the letter reportedly reads. You can make it easy, or you can play hardball, and we all get battered and bruised. The choice is yours. Easley is reportedly serving a 75-year sentence in prison. According to public records, Easley was up for parole in November 2019, but was denied on the grounds that she's still a danger to public safety. She will once again face the parole board in November 2021. While Naomi Easley was a person of interest in the disappearance of Gracie Nash and the murder of John Henry Davis Jr., she has not been charged with any crimes connected to either case. At the time of her disappearance, Gracie Nash stood 5 feet 5 inches tall and weighed 112 pounds. She had black dark brown hair and brown eyes. Gracie wore full dentures and was last seen wearing a white nurse's uniform and gray coat with a large fur collar. She would be 76 years old at the time of this publication. Anyone with information about this case is urged to contact the Austin Police Department at 512-974-8643, agency case number 83-0247-858, the Texas Department of Public Safety at 512-424-5074, agency case number M05081010, or their local authorities. Please share this story about Gracie Nash to help reignite the investigation into her disappearance. She is our sister and her life matters.
Number 4.
LaQuanta Riley was a friendly teenager with a bubbly personality and a lot of friends. Although she had been living with a friend in Eufaula, Alabama for a few months, she decided to move back home to her great-aunt's house in Montgomery after Thanksgiving in 2003. She was preparing to go to college and get a degree in criminal justice. She was hoping for a career in law enforcement or forensic science. On the evening of December 7, 2003, LaQuanta decided to go out with a friend. Her friend picked her up at her aunt's house around 11:30 p.m., then drove her to her mother's home 3 miles away so she could grab a warmer coat. Her brother met her at the door when she got there and the two chatted briefly while she picked out a jacket. Noticing the car idling outside, her brother asked her who she was with. LaQuanta told him it was a friend she met in the neighborhood, then breezed out the door. Within seconds, she was gone. It was the last time anyone in her family would see LaQuanta. LaQuanta's mother, Pam Riley, had been just 16 years old when LaQuanta was born, so Pam's Aunt Katie had taken responsibility for raising the child. When LaQuanta decided she wanted to move back to Montgomery, her great-aunt had been more than happy to welcome her back into her house. She did, however, have one rule that both LaQuanta and her cousin Stacy had to follow. While living under her roof, they were not to bring any men into the house. Katie was visiting relatives in Georgia during the first week in December, but she had spoken to LaQuanta on the phone several times. She spoke with her for the last time on the afternoon of December 7. LaQuanta had been arguing with her uncle and called her great-aunt to tell her about it, though she reassured her that there was nothing to worry about. Apparently, LaQuanta had wanted to have a male friend over, but her uncle had reminded her of the no men in the house rule, and the two had then gotten into a verbal argument about it. LaQuanta eventually conceded, and Katie didn't get the impression that there was any lingering animosity between the two of them. Since LaQuanta was living at Katie's house, Pam was not immediately aware that her daughter had not returned from her night out. After a couple of days without hearing from her, however, Pam started to grow concerned. Her cousin Stacy hadn't seen her since she left on the evening of December 7, and she hadn't gotten in touch with her great-aunt or her uncle. LaQuanta's brother had seen her immediately prior to her disappearance. He was also the only family member to see the person who drove off with LaQuanta. He told them that LaQuanta had gotten into a green 4-door car, possibly a Caprice or a Taurus, around 11:40 p.m. the night. He hadn't recognized the driver of the car, and LaQuanta had not mentioned the man's name. All she said was that he was a neighborhood friend. It wasn't much to go on, but it was a start. Pam called the Montgomery Police Department and reported her daughter missing, but law enforcement did little to locate her in the days that followed. LaQuanta was legally an adult and free to go wherever she pleased without checking in with her family. Since there were no signs of foul play, police were reluctant to get involved. Katie returned from Georgia later that week. She had been praying that LaQuanta would be there to greet her when she got back, but her whereabouts remained unknown. Despite what police believed, her family was convinced that something was desperately wrong, and they launched their own search for the missing teenager. They called all her friends and hung up missing posters all over Montgomery. They combed their neighborhood looking for any sign of her, but she had seemingly vanished into thin air. There was nothing to suggest that LaQuanta had disappeared voluntarily. She left all her belongings behind. She didn't even take her purse with her. She had already been making plans to celebrate Christmas with her family and had even started doing some shopping. LaQuanta Riley was a friendly teenager with a bubbly personality and a lot of friends. Although she had been living with a friend in Eufaula, Alabama for a few months, she decided to move back home to her great-aunt's house in Montgomery after Thanksgiving in 2003. She was preparing to go to college and get a degree in criminal justice. She was hoping for a career in law enforcement or forensic science. On the evening of December 7, 2003, LaQuanta decided to go out with a friend. Her friend picked her up at her aunt's house around 11:30 p.m., then drove her to her mother's home 3 miles away so she could grab a warmer coat. Her brother met her at the door when she got there and the two chatted briefly while she picked out a jacket. Noticing the car idling outside, her brother asked her who she was with. LaQuanta told him it was a friend she met in the neighborhood, then breezed out the door. Within seconds, she was gone. It was the last time anyone in her family would see LaQuanta. LaQuanta's mother, Pam Riley, had been just 16 years old when LaQuanta was born, so Pam's Aunt Katie had taken responsibility for raising the child. When LaQuanta decided she wanted to move back to Montgomery, her great-aunt had been more than happy to welcome her back into her house. She did, however, have one rule that both LaQuanta and her cousin Stacy had to follow. While living under her roof, they were not to bring any men into the house. Katie was visiting relatives in Georgia during the first week in December, but she had spoken to LaQuanta on the phone several times. She spoke with her for the last time on the afternoon of December 7. LaQuanta had been arguing with her uncle and called her great-aunt to tell her about it, though she reassured her that there was nothing to worry about. Apparently, LaQuanta had wanted to have a male friend over, but her uncle had reminded her of the no men in the house rule, and the two had then gotten into a verbal argument about it. LaQuanta eventually conceded, and Katie didn't get the impression that there was any lingering animosity between the two of them. Since LaQuanta was living at Katie's house, Pam was not immediately aware that her daughter had not returned from her night out. After a couple of days without hearing from her, however, Pam started to grow concerned. Her cousin Stacy hadn't seen her since she left on the evening of December 7, and she hadn't gotten in touch with her great-aunt or her uncle. LaQuanta's brother had seen her immediately prior to her disappearance. He was also the only family member to see the person who drove off with LaQuanta. He told them that LaQuanta had gotten into a green 4-door car, possibly a Caprice or a Taurus, around 11:40 p.m. the night. He hadn't recognized the driver of the car, and LaQuanta had not mentioned the man's name. All she said was that he was a neighborhood friend. It wasn't much to go on, but it was a start. Pam called the Montgomery Police Department and reported her daughter missing, but law enforcement did little to locate her in the days that followed. LaQuanta was legally an adult and free to go wherever she pleased without checking in with her family. Since there were no signs of foul play, police were reluctant to get involved. Katie returned from Georgia later that week. She had been praying that LaQuanta would be there to greet her when she got back, but her whereabouts remained unknown. Despite what police believed, her family was convinced that something was desperately wrong, and they launched their own search for the missing teenager. They called all her friends and hung up missing posters all over Montgomery. They combed their neighborhood looking for any sign of her, but she had seemingly vanished into thin air. There was nothing to suggest that LaQuanta had disappeared voluntarily. She left all her belongings behind. She didn't even take her purse with her. She had already been making plans to celebrate Christmas with her family and had even started doing some shopping. Although LaQuanta's case is still considered active and there is a reward being offered for information leading to her whereabouts, detectives are no closer to solving the case. Both investigators and LaQuanta's family believe that there are people living in the Montgomery area who know what happened to her but refuse to come forward. They urge anyone with information to contact detectives and let them know so the family can have some form of closure. LaQuanta Riley was 19 years old when she went missing in 2003. She has brown eyes and black hair, and at the time of her disappearance, she was 5 feet 8 inches tall and weighed 200 pounds. She was last seen wearing blue jeans, a green and yellow shirt, and green and yellow Reebok sneakers. Her ears and tongue are pierced. She was wearing a silver barbell in her tongue and a silver chain bracelet when she went missing. She has a tattoo that says Rip Mesha on one bicep and one that says LaQuanta on the other. If you have any information about LaQuanta, please contact the Montgomery Police Department at 334 241 2350.
Number 5.
16-year-old Texas teen Monica Carrasco disappeared on October 1, 2003 from the home of her relatives. She has never been found. Monica Carrasco, 16, was last seen by her aunt and uncle around 11 p.m. on October 1, 2003 at 3701 County Road 323 in Balmorhea, Texas. Monica was staying with them following an argument with her mother. Around 1:30 a.m. Monica's cousins checked on her, and she was asleep in her bed. By 6 a.m., she had vanished. Monica left behind her personal belongings including clothes and shoes. However, her Bible was missing. Police found no evidence of forced entry and Monica's room was undisturbed. Monica's relatives said she was an avid runner and may have gotten up early to go running. However, she was still in her beige nightgown and did not have shoes on. The terrain is rugged with rocks, cacti, and thorns, so it is not an ideal place someone would run in without shoes. Monica's relatives also believe she may have become disoriented from her medications and wandered off. Despite air and land searches, Monica Carrasco has never been found. Police searched the aunt and uncle's home extensively, but found no evidence of a crime. Monica's uncle took and failed a polygraph test. A few months before she disappeared, Monica was harassed by her school bus driver to the point she refused to ride the bus again. She did not report the abuse to authorities. Police interviewed him after she vanished and ruled him out as a suspect. It is unclear why he was ruled out. In 2015, police reopened the case. In 2000, Monica's father passed away from bone cancer and she became severely depressed. She was hospitalized for depression and anorexia after she lost over 50 pounds. However, most people do not believe she took her own life, and her mother does not believe she ran away. Well, I think her aunt and uncle know more than they are saying. To suggest she may have gone running in her nightgown and bare feet is just plain ludicrous. All we have about Monica Carrasco's last moments are from her family. She went to bed at 11 o'clock, and her cousins checked on her at 1:30. Why would they check on a 16-year-old? I thought that was a bit odd. The last people who saw her alive are the same people who came up with the silly running theory and who offered up the Monica may have been disoriented theory. There's no way an avid runner would run barefoot in a nightgown through rugged terrain. Police found zero evidence a crime had been committed inside the aunt and uncle's home. Okay, but did they check outside? What about any outdoor buildings? Vehicles? Maybe the crime was committed in an entirely different location. Maybe wherever her body is. There is the possibility that someone known to her knocked on the outside entrance in her room after the cousins checked on her at 1:30, but who would that be? Did she have a boyfriend? Why did she take her Bible but nothing else? Why would she not put clothes on? Another theory floating around is that Monica willingly left to meet a man she met on the internet. Where did this theory come from? Did police check computers in the home? A cell phone? Why did she leave in just her nightgown and no shoes? Makes no sense. I don't buy this theory at all. I don't believe her depression had anything to do with her disappearance. Someone on Websleuth suggested that this was probably what led to her demise and she might have committed suicide. Well, where's the body? This user also suggested she could have been sleepwalking and someone picked her up. This is a legit theory if she had previously walked in her sleep. Did she just go for a little walk and the wrong person drove by and picked her up? Maybe, but why would you take a walk without shoes on your feet? What is the significance of the missing Bible, if any? Well, from what I understand, she was very religious and often prayed. Perhaps she knew she was in danger and took the Bible for comfort. Balmorhea is a very small town in West Texas and not too far from Mexico. So, I think whoever took her also knew her. She could have been taken into Mexico, but I'm betting on the aunt and/or uncle. The family was the last to see her before she vanished, and the uncle failed a polygraph. And let's not forget the theories they threw out to police. So if they are responsible, what was the motive? Maybe the uncle was a pervert. Maybe an argument escalated.
Number 6.
15 years after a young pregnant woman vanished while getting a ride home from a Thanksgiving party, her mother is hoping this week's anniversary of her disappearance can put the spotlight back on the unsolved case. Every single day gets worse. It doesn't get better, said Patricia Trevino, whose daughter Lucero Sabaria hasn't been seen since November 26, 2004. It's never going to be the same without her. Known by family members as Princess, Lucero was just 21 years old at the time of her disappearance. She had 2 small children, ages 3 and 1, and was 8 months pregnant. But here we are, 15 years later, said Trevino, seemingly no closer to learning the truth about what happened to her daughter. We're still looking for her, we're still searching for her. On November 25, 2004, Lucero attended a Thanksgiving party with friends and family. At the end of the night, she got a ride from a male acquaintance named Richard Chabes, 29 at the time, but she never made it home. Trevino, who was living with her daughter back then, says she spoke to her around 1:30 a.m. on the 26th and learned Lucero was at Chabes' apartment. I said, "You need to come because it's already late," she recalled. And I heard her asking him, "Can you drop me off already?" and he said yes. She goes, "Okay mom, I'm on my way," and that was the last I heard from her. The next morning, when Lucero never showed up at home, Trevino says she got in touch with Chabes. I said, "I heard you were going to give her a ride. I heard you in the background," she said. And he goes, "Well, I was going to, but she got out of the car and started walking." Trevino says Chabes told her that Lucero started walking near the corner of Callahan and Ingram Road. And I said, "What time was this?" He goes, "I don't know, I'm too wasted," she said. These were his words. "I'm too wasted." And I was like, well, this doesn't sound right. Trevino went to police with her suspicions, and later that same day she says officers went to Chabe's apartment, known at the time as the Kingswood Manor Apartments off Callahan Road. By the time they got there to the apartment, he was already gone, Trevino said. The neighbors said that he had rented a U-Haul and packed everything and left. They searched the whole apartment and that's when they told us they found blood stains on the wall. According to news archives, more than a year would go by following Lucero's disappearance before detectives managed to track down Chabes to Indiana, where he was serving time in jail on an unrelated charge. He has never formally been named a suspect in Lucero's case, nor has he ever been charged with any crime in connection to the case. "It doesn't make any sense," said Trevino. "And every year we say the same thing. They say time will heal, but it doesn't heal. To us, it only makes it worse because we haven't seen her in such a long time." Lucero's children are now 18 and 16. Trevino says they have no memory of their mother. For their sake, she hopes enough time has gone by for someone out there to finally develop a guilty conscience and come forward with information that leads authorities to Lucero, who would now be 36. "That would be the best thing ever," she said. "If they would be able to just, you know what, it's been 15 years. Let me tell you what happened." Lucero Princess Sabaria remains missing today. The San Antonio police are investigating her disappearance. If you have any information that could lead to her whereabouts, please contact 210-207-7660.
Number 7.
Today we are going to examine the disappearance of Catherine Davidson, a young black girl who disappeared from a Michigan park. This case is just one of many black stories that need to be told. Let's get into it. Catherine, who typically went by the nickname Kathy, was born on December 13, 1966 in Chicago, Illinois. She was described as a lively, active child in 1973. Standing at 3'10" and weighing around 70 pounds, she seemed to be properly taken care of as well. She was a few months away from her 7th birthday when a trip to a park in Sawyer, Michigan, would hold a devastating tragedy that is, if you believe the reports of her disappearance as they are. As you'll see later in this post, there is some sort of treachery afoot. The Davidson family drove to Sawyer, Michigan on September 1, 1973, to have a picnic. After parking, the adults Catherine's father Robert and stepmother Anna set to unpacking the car, and the kids ran off to play. They walked to the banks of the Painterville Drain, a canal that emptied into Lake Michigan. After about 15 minutes, all of the kids except Catherine returned to the adults. Catherine has never been seen again. The police were called and searches began for the 6-year-old. The only thing found during these searches was a pair of green underpants that are not known to be connected to Catherine. The police were fairly skeptical of the parents from the get-go, as their attitude was cold and seemingly uncaring, as they reported Catherine missing. Only 3 days after Catherine's disappearance, Anna and Robert were reportedly seen hanging out with another couple and having a grand old time. They were laughing and drinking, like nothing had happened. As strange as this behavior was, the kids all backed up their story, and the police could find no evidence to implicate them. As stated in the intro, Kathy stood at about 3'10" and weighed around 70 pounds. She was last seen wearing a white shirt with blue shorts and white sandals. At the time of her disappearance, her hair was in tight rows. One reason why Catherine's disappearance is so interesting is what happened after she vanished. Catherine's stepmother went on to start a cult. Yes, an actual cult. After Catherine's disappearance, her family moved from Chicago. They spent some time in Zebulon, what a name, Georgia before they settled in Florida. Anna and Robert then founded a religious organization called House of Prayer for All People. The group required a strict kosher diet and modest dress, including floor-length robes and head coverings. The group discouraged individuality on all fronts. When members joined, they had to shed their old name and take on a new alias. Anna changed her name to Anna Young, and Robert changed his name to Jonah Young, though he died shortly after the founding of the group in 1988. New recruits were also required to forfeit their savings to Anna and Robert. The cult was obviously not a happy place. Anna was reported to be extremely viscous in her practices and behavior. She made a practice of separating children from their parents and then refused to feed them, routinely humiliated them in front of other cult members, and beat them. It should be noted that Anna did this to the adult members as well, but it occurred more frequently with the children. She claimed she was harming members because they had sinned, and the beatings consisted of 33 lashes with a whip, the same amount Jesus endured before he was crucified. Other punishments included child abandonment, bathing a member in bleach, and starvation until death. Anna had faced charges of child abuse and murder, and was finally caught and charged with the murder of a young cult member in 2017. If nothing else, this shows that Anna had a propensity for violence towards children. Keep this in mind as we examine the theories. In the time since Catherine's disappearance, speculation has run rampant in regards to where she went and what happened to her. There are two broad theories here. Catherine was murdered and Catherine was abducted. Each of these theories can be broken down into sub-theories. The first sub-theory under the abduction umbrella is that Catherine was abducted by a stranger and kept alive. This is the theory of the hopeful. While situations like this do happen, the abducted is usually far younger than Catherine was. Catherine was old enough to have stable memories of her family and would likely ask questions of her abductor, which would lead to the danger of being exposed. This does not seem very likely to me. The other side of that theory is that Catherine was abducted by a stranger and murdered. This is slightly more likely in my mind. We have seen cases time and time again where a child was snatched while doing something routine in public. I don't have any information on how busy the park was on the day Catherine disappeared, but outdoor activities are pretty popular in Michigan in the fall. It stands to reason that other people were in the park, and maybe the wrong person found Catherine